Welcome to UFHL Now! A close-up look at the ultimate fantasy hockey league. The most realistic fantasy gameplay. High stakes. High reward. Here's your host, the owner of Duckman's domination in the UFHL, and the mighty Mallards of the UFAHL, Dean Millard.
Hey there, and welcome to another edition of UFHL Now. I am Dean Millard, the proud owner of Duckman's Domination. Currently, yes, we are occupying the basement suite of the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League, but soon our Ducks will be flying together up the standings. I just saw a picture of the original Mighty Ducks all grown up, so that makes me feel really old, but I know Duck Power is all the rage as of late, and will be for years to come in the UFHL after we build our championship team. Welcome to the show. We are proudly on the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network. Would love to get you on that network if you have a fantasy sports podcast that you think needs a home. You can get a hold of us on Twitter at UFS Network. You can also email UFSN at UFFsports.com. And if you'd like to get a hold of Duckman's Domination of the UFHL, it's at Ducks Domination on Twitter. All right, we've got a loaded show for you. Mika Zibanejad, one of the guys we'll be talking about, as well as Mark Stone, who was rock solid last week for a couple of teams, the Knights and the Knights. Also, Larry Fisher, our UFHL Insider, has a massive segment. So many things. It's just overflowing with tidbits. We'll have our top 5 players when it comes to takeaways, and we will also take a look at the top 10 standings, which did definitely have some movement this week. All right, let's dive into the UFHL now.
You're watching the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network, UFSN, your one-stop fantasy shop. Get in touch on Twitter at UFS Network. Email us, UFSN at UFFsports.com.
All right, let's dive into things, and we'll start with a New York Ranger that was just absolutely out of sight. Talking about Mika Zibanejad and a huge week thanks to that 6-point night versus the Flyers. This whole list could have been Rangers from that game, but the Ice Vikings, who I traded Mika to, you're welcome, they were dancing in the street with Little Z's week. A good poker hand as well with 3 of a kind. 8 points, 8 shots, and 8 hits. And, you know, I don't know what happened with the Rangers. I thought they would be much better. Obviously, missing some guys for different reasons didn't help. But Zibanejad, there's a lot of talent to go around on that team with both lines, and that the skill that they have, and, you know, even Ryan Strome, who the Oilers should have never gotten rid of, having all kinds of success on Broadway. So Mika Zibanejad definitely working out well for the Ice Vikings. Mikko Rantanen was also productive for Red Army. The Avstar had 9 points, double that in shots. He leads Colorado in NHL points, but is second on Red Army to Red Hot Patrick Kane in fantasy points. Kane is third overall in the UFHL, while Rantanen is ninth, and only the Yetis and Red Army have 2 players in the top 10. I've been a fan of Mikko Rantanen for quite a long time. And Tyson Barrie just keeps producing. And he is looking really smart for betting on himself with a 1-year deal in Edmonton in the NHL. And while the Stingrays will have to deal with a sizable raise in the offseason, they are reaping the rewards of the top point-producing defenseman in the NHL. He is third overall in fantasy points by a defenseman behind Nurse and Victor Hedman. They are only 3 of the only 5 blue liners with over 100 fantasy points. Chris Letang sitting on Greta right now, 99 points from a fantasy perspective from a blue liner. Barry's 8-point week, 4 of them on the power play, and 3 hits, helping the Stingrays do some damage this week. Continuing on, former Brandon Weeking. I am contractually obligated to say that every time I mention a former Brandon Weeking. Just the price you pay growing up in Brandon. Anyway, Mark Stone, rock solid as usual. Not just with points, but he dropped the gloves with Thomas Hertl this week. The hair was flying. It was awesome. And as always, delivering takeaways. One of the smartest players in the league. And the Crypto Knights are loving their leading scorer. And if only the Knights could follow in the Golden Knights' skate strides and get Max Pacioretty, who plays so well alongside Stone. Stone, the setup guy, Pacioretty, the finisher. But the Outlaws, getting them to agree with that, well, that might be easier than beating the house at a craps table in Vegas. How about Philip Grubauer? Just nearly perfect. Posts one shutout, 79 saves over 4 wins and just 2 goals against. So Mr. Grubauer, just an absolute brick wall. A lot of Avalanche talk here today. And then, you look at the Grizzlies to wrap this up, and you obviously look to Leon Draisaitl, who gets a lot of coverage when it comes to the Grizzlies, and rightfully so. When you have the best passer in the league who can also score 50 goals, he's going to get a lot of attention. But how about some love for Nazem Kadri, who not only had 6 points, but 4 penalties and fired 23 shots on net since last Friday. He's now second on the Grizzlies with 95 shots, 2 back of Draisaitl, and it won't be long before he is surpassing the century mark and celebrating in that right. All right, let's take a look at the top 5 players in the UFHL now when it comes to takeaways. And no surprise that Mark Stone is in there. As I mentioned, he's so smart. Leon Draisaitl certainly getting a lot better. He's been criticized locally, nationally, internationally for their defensive play, him and Connor McDavid. And lo and behold, here he is with 30 takeaways so far on the season. And another really, really smart player learned from Dale Hawerchuk, who, by the way, as I'll just bring it back to me for a second, is the autograph that is sitting in the back behind me in our set. So there is the late, great Dale Hawerchuk. Goes up there with other things. This skate, by the way, whittled by my dad. It's actually made out of wood. Just unbelievable. Anyway, I got off topic as I tend to do. Back to the takeaways. Mark Stone, Mark Scheifele, these guys who learned from smart people in their junior teams. And, Leon Draisaitl, pretty good for that matter. Definitely a great face-off guy, starting to do some damage in takeaways. Nick Paul, a little bit of a surprise in there as the top 5. And then you have the trio from Blades of Steel and Backlund, Brown, Matthews, rounding out the top 5 in takeaways. We'll try to look at different categories and different things, different unique things about the league in our top 5s. Every week we do that, but a heated race for takeaways, and while they don't contribute, a ton of points, they certainly do add up when you have some of the best players in the game that are doing the taking away. All right, now we dive into our top 10 standings, and we see no change for Red Army, the Ice Vikings, or the Titans as they sit 1, 2, 3 in the standings. The Royals make a move, getting into the top 4, moving up 1 spot. The Outlaws, the biggest jump this week, moving from 7 to 5. And the Yetis, who Larry Fisher will talk about in the Insider, the biggest drop, going from 4 to 6. Rock Republic also drops 1 spot, and then the Grizzlies, Stingrays, and Blades of Steel remaining the same. So the first 3, the last 3 remain the same in our top 10, but some jockeying of positions and some moving around in the middle of the top 10. And, it's interesting. I said last week, I'm not very confident in somebody catching the Red Army. So as we bring up Fantrax here and we look at the actual standings and the point differential, the lead is now just 43-45. I think it was about 48-50 close to last week. I don't think that the Royals will be able to move into that top 3 spot as we're looking at it, but we've mentioned several players from Red Army today. They're just, unless there's something terrible that happens, and you don't wish injuries on anybody. That's the only way I think the Ice Vikings just have a massive push down the stretch. I think I'm confident in saying that Luke, a.k.a. George Steinbrenner, is going to ride away with the top spot this year. I hope there's a great race down the stretch, but I just look at that roster, especially if Philadelphia ever starts turning things around in the goaltending department. It could be pretty tough to catch. Now, playoffs, anything can happen. Other teams can load up. You can get a Chris Kontos. You can get a John Druce going. You can get a Fernando Pisani go on an absolute heater. But as for regular season, I'm putting my money on Red Army to finish on the top spot. All right, the segment you're all waiting for now, the UFHL Insider with Larry Fisher here on UFHL Now.
Time to get the scoop on the UFHL with our insider, Larry Fisher. He's had lines in the water all week long. What will he reel in for us today? Let's dive in and find out what's going on with the UFHL. Now!
Looking forward to finding out what the UFHL insider Larry Fisher has in store for us today. Larry, this is quickly becoming a lot of people's favorite segment because they're wondering, is their team gonna pop up? What has the insider found out about their franchise? So we're starting out with a bit of a familiar topic over the last little bit, and that is franchises for sale.
Yeah, so again, I think the benchmark has been raised by the expansion franchise auction, which sold our version of the Seattle Kraken, the UFHL's 32nd franchise, sold for $10,000 USD, and a lot of other franchises who got in as early adopters at that $1,500 USD mark. That was an eye opener to them. That hey, now we're gone from 4 figures to 5 figures. So we had the Elite Assassins came out almost immediately after the auction and said, hey, we're fielding offers, we're for sale. And now that was last week. And now this week, the Blizzard franchise, Dylan Wheaton, who bought around that $1,500 sale mark in December, a few months later, he sees that $10,000 as a potential profit margin. And I did reach out to Dylan to just sort of get his take on why the Blizzard was for sale. And he actually told me, he said, this isn't strictly a financial move, but a mix of that and life catching up with me. Over the past couple months, I have had some life-changing events occupy more of my time, and I am struggling to find the time and the effort needed for a project like this. So with that and the success of the expansion franchise, I figured the timing is right. So kind of, partially he's motivated by the fact that it could be a 5-figure sale. But also motivated just by the fact that, as you know, Dean, as a franchise owner in the UFHL, it's a big undertaking. And if you don't have a supporting cast, a staff surrounding you, which Dylan right now is, relatively new as a franchise owner and just has himself. So it's probably pretty overwhelming. And so the potential to turn that kind of profit is enticing to him if the right offer came along for the Blizzard.
Well, and that's why, single ownership is so tough to do. And, I was so thankful that George Batchel has joined the group to be assistant GM, and Jamie Thomas kind of staying on as a consultant. And, and that's why we formed the affiliation with High Level Scouting. So, we could bend Craig Button's ear at times. So this, kudos to anybody who can do it as a one-man job. I just think it's very, very tough. And the financial aspect is there. And, there may be a time where Duckman's Domination has to make that choice of, do we want to sell the franchise and then focus all the time with Trish and the scouting agency and things like that. But that's where the UFHL brings so many different choices when you do want to sell or you do want to diversify or things like that. There's a lot of options out there.
There is. And the other thing we're seeing at times is these so-called cash out trades, right? Where franchises they may not get their asking price when they put their franchise on the block. So they then turn around because they own each individual player as an NFT as well. And so they look at their roster and say, hey, what if I, trade one of my top players in exchange for another lower level player in cash, or perhaps even a big blockbuster trade, which we did see with the Elite Assassins this week. So there are different ways to sort of leverage the NFTs that you own as well as the franchise, but we're seeing it more and more with franchises that go on the sale block. If they don't get the offer they want right away, they tend to revert back to a trade that includes cash considerations coming back. And in the case of Elite Assassins, Harrison and his wife Elaine as the franchise owner, Harrison as the general manager, they pulled off a blockbuster trade. And the way Harrison explained it is they wanted to get back to where they began. And so they bought the Elite Assassins in November 6th for right around that $1,500 USD. And they pulled off a blockbuster trade, trading a handful of quality players for a handful of, what you would call bad contracts in a salary cap league, as well as $1,500 USD cash to sort of balance that off. So we're seeing those cash out trades become sort of an unpopular trend because other franchises that are contending and competing, they don't like to see a handful or a few quality players go in exchange for cash, right? They'd like to see more hockey deals. So it's a bit of an unpopular trend, but it has become a trend. And so the Elite Assassins were the latest to go that route, but Harrison right away jumped out and said, hey, don't consider this a move to piece out my roster. I wanted to get back to a profitable situation where my investment in is now covered with the cash I got back. And now I might not sell, or we might not sell the franchise. We might enjoy this rebuild because they do have 12 picks in the next 3 drafts, including 6 in 2021, 4 of them being first rounders. So I think, like I said, that the 5-figure sale is the new benchmark and people want that. But if they can't get it, then they're looking for other ways to monetize and get money out of their roster.
Well, and it's interesting, that franchise with that many draft picks is attractive. And maybe a potential owner might say, I'm going to wait until he buys all those draft picks and then I will buy it. But if you're Harrison, you're going to be like, well, if I invested this money in these draft picks, the price of the sale is going up. So lots of different things. And, I know we do have a competition committee that we do review different trades and have in the past with this one. But this one didn't come through. So I think this, obviously passed through. And it's good for Harrison to get out in front of it. But I didn't hear a lot of rumblings about this. People that weren't happy about this.
Yeah, surprisingly, in my estimation, because this was maybe the one where there was almost no future assets going back along with the cash. It was, like I said, you look at the trade. He traded Nico Hischier, Oliver Wahlstrom, Nils Hoglander, Adam Lowry, and Scott Mayfield. 5 pretty productive players on pretty good contracts for Ryan McDonough, Brendan Gooley, Artem Anisimov, Jay Beagle, Cedric Paquette, Dean Kuckin, Vinny Lacheri, and then the $1,500 USD. And the only name that jumps out there is Ryan McDonough, but potentially, he's not a huge fantasy player anymore, and he's got people would say on the bad side of contracts as opposed to the good side. So the main piece coming back there is the cash. And so in the past, when these trades have happened, people have been up in arms, but not this time. I think everybody's sort of accepted the current reality. And the perk was, 20% or 15% of that cash goes into the prize pool. And it just so happened to push the UFHL total prize pool over 50,000 USD. So there was a lot of celebrating, I think, to hit the 50,000 mark and not so much grumbling. And maybe part of it was the franchise that acquired those players. The Generals are currently outside of the playoff picture, kind of down around the 20th in the standings. So they're going to get a big push going forward towards the playoffs. But I don't think there was the uproar that there would have been if it was a top 10 franchise pulling off that type of cash trade. So, but again, cash considerations are part of the game, and there is the financial aspect, and people need to prepare for that because there are other franchises who are willing to offer up, 4 figures for one player in order to improve their chances of winning more prize money and having more valuable NFTs. So we're going to continue to see the cash trades, but there may be some type of potential rule that if a franchise is posted for sale to limit their ability to do these sort of cash out trades. But like I said, Harrison's, I have a quote from Harrison as well. And he said, not looking to do any more cash trades, did that all at once. Team will only improve from here on out or no trade will happen. Only wanted to get my original investment back, which I have now done. So, And then, like I said, he followed up saying, we may not sell now. We're not sure. We might be rebuilding now. So, and said that the rebuild would be fun because he comes from the scouting background with Ruby ISS scouting agency. So the Elite Assassins are still listening to offers, but after making a blockbuster trade like this, obviously you lose 5 good players. Your asking price has to come down on the franchise realistically as well, because you don't have as much left there. Although they still have Evgeny Malkin, they have Gabriel Velarde and Evgeny Malkin, who they acquired from Red Army. They have another young top prospect, Grigory Denisenko, coming up in Florida. They have Jacob Trouba anchoring the blue line with Cam York as an up-and-comer for the Philadelphia Flyers as well. So they have 5 real quality assets plus the 12 draft picks. So anybody who wants to get into the UFHL and sort of build your team from scratch, that's a franchise to buy and build around those, those handful of core pieces, as well as all those draft picks that are coming up over the next 3 years, including a big year in 2021.
So you did, as you mentioned, have a conversation with the owner of the Blizzard. Did you get any sense that, whether they want to call it a fire sale or whatever it is, the cash out trades will happen with that franchise?
I didn't get into that topic with Dylan, but I think the temptation has to be there, just because the majority of other franchises that have been put up for sale, if they don't get their asking price immediately, they tend to entertain cash considerations type trades. So I think it's a possibility. You look at Blizzard, they have some key guys that are on relatively cheap contracts. Guys like Capo Caco, Travis Konechny, Max Domi, Noah Hannafin, and Hampus Lindholm would sort of be their 5 that would generate interest for potential buyers. But again, we keep coming back to the salary cap, and a lot of these franchises that are currently contending, currently in the top 16 playoff seeds, they're essentially capped out, and they can't really afford to take on even a $4 million salary unless there's an equal type money in, money out type deal. And in a lot of cases, their rosters are so deep that even as good as those players are, they wouldn't be huge upgrades to offset the money in order to include a large sum of cash. So, but I do think, Dylan, he said he feels he has left the team in a very good state for any interested party to fully put their mark on it. A top 5 pick this year, 3 first-round picks in 2022, which is a stronger draft than 2021, generally speaking, and another 3 first-round picks in 2023. So along with a decent roster and a full protected list, Blizzard's one of the franchises that has the full 27 players on a protected list. So I think like he said, he's left the franchise in pretty good shape, and I don't sense that he's planning a tear down. But if the offers don't come for the franchise, that temptation has to be there to recoup his initial investment as well. But one thing I would caution franchises that are looking at cash out trades, remember, we have a new entry fee coming this season. And what if you're cashing out for $1,500 and all of a sudden the entry fee is $1,500? You got to put that right back in to play the game. And now you've decimated your roster to the point where you don't stand a chance of winning that money back. So you always have to keep an eye on the future. And that is one thing to be aware of, is that if the entry fees do take a big jump and you did a cash out trade and you recouped your investment, but what if you have to put that back in year over year and the roster you're left with has no chance of winning? So if franchises want to phase out these cash out trades, that's probably the easiest way to do it, is to increase the buy-in, to make sure if you want to sell your best players, go for it. But you're not going to be able to afford to play any longer. And then you're going to have to take what you can get for your franchise, because it's not going to be worthwhile continually paying a higher entry fee with no chance of recouping it through the prize money if you've torn down your roster in exchange for a quick buck kind of thing. But to get back to that original investment break-even point, I think anybody who's into investing and treating it as an investment, that is a motivating factor, and that's why we see some of these cash out trades along the way.
Well, we have different franchises that we highlight on different shows in each episode, and I have guys reaching out and saying, hey, you got to talk more about my team on there, or our team, or things like that. But we're talking about the Generals today and the bit of a playoff push that they're putting on.
Yeah, so the Generals were on the receiving end of this trade involving Elite Assassins. So the Generals, to get Nico Hischier, Oliver Wahlstrom, Nils Hoglander, Adam Lowry, and Scott Mayfield in the same package. That's a huge boost, obviously, to they're about, as of today, they're 88 points out of the playoffs in that Gretzky division, which some call the weak sister division. But the Stallions have been holding strong. They've kind of been the 4th seed all along, and both the Godfathers and the Generals have been closing that gap within 100 points. But you look at the Generals roster, and I think you can really see the trending up. And the one thing with the Generals with receiving those players is they almost recouped their assets in a roundabout way, because right before Curtis Johnson bought the Generals, formerly known as the Bombers, there was a cash out trade where Miro Heiskanen, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and Kirby Doc were traded for, I think, Troy Terry, a first round pick, and $1,800 came back in that trade. So he lost 3 cornerstone franchise pieces there, and now he's recouped a handful of quality players. But you also look at the Generals, and they got Vladimir Tarasenko back recently, and he's going to get up to speed here and start scoring more for St. Louis. Tyler Seguin is back skating for Dallas. He's 3 to 5 weeks away, likely coming back in April, but there's another big boost. And he just made a trade not too long ago where he acquired Ryan Donato and Kevin LeBanc from the Tornadoes, both forwards for San Jose. So the Generals have been piecing together this roster. And again, they're one of the teams that on paper were probably a playoff franchise heading into the season if they were healthy. But they weren't, and they lost a lot of man games to injury, especially with big ringers like Tarasenko and Seguin. But now they're getting healthy, and they're still within striking distance at that, under 100 points behind fourth place in their division, the Gretzky division. So I wouldn't rule out a playoff surge or a playoff push by the Generals down the stretch here with 25 games left in the NHL schedule. There's almost a half a season to go, and they're only going to get stronger the rest of the way. So I think the Stallions, they're the front runners right now for that fourth playoff seed, but they should definitely keep an eye out in their rearview mirror for the Generals.
All right, as we get closer and closer to the UFHL trade deadline, we're going to hear all kinds of names coming up, and you got a bunch of names as far as talking trades this week.
Yeah, it's been another eventful week on the trade bait board. Not a lot of consummated other than that big blockbuster we keep referencing between the Generals and the Elite Assassins. That was the trade that everybody was talking about this week, but there's a lot more names coming out on the trade block that are the trade bait board that are of interest. And one that took me by surprise, and the Insider didn't see this one coming, was Dominic Kubalik. Arnie Entz, the GM of the Royals, sort of rolled it out that, trade talks were well underway, and that there was a potential for Dominic Kubalik to move. And then a couple days later, Arnie said that the hype train was aborted on Kubalik moving out. And with Kubalik, the Royals being now a top 5 franchise, I think they're not resting on their laurels. They want to keep pushing. They'd like to get as close to the top 3 and maybe give Red Army a scare here in the second half. But with Arnie, I think he said, multiple teams have messaged on Kubalik, but he called it an insane value on the expansion exempt part of a top 6 power play 1 guy. He said a team has reached out and had a player that was of significant interest, but they wanted a second piece coming back. And any trade the Royals make, they want to move out 1 player and get 2 back, because Arnie did the math and he said the Royals are leading the league in points per game played. So if you go fantasy points per game, the Royals are number 1 in the league. But due to a lack of depth, they're 90 games behind the league leader as far as games played goes. So they got productive players, but they don't have enough depth to compete with those top 3, the Red Army, the Ice Vikings, and the Titans. So they're looking to bolster their depth by moving a guy like Kubalik or perhaps a Mike Hoffman or a Thomas Tatar and sending out 1 in exchange for 2. So they'd like to get 2 guys back, and that's been a bit of a sticking point for other contending franchises that don't want to give up a 2 for 1. But that's the type of deal the Royals are looking to make between now and the April 12th trade deadline.
What's going on with the Grizzlies and Teuvo Teravainen?
He's a frustrating player this season, Teuvo Teravainen, because he's got so much talent, and he's got one of those contracts at around that $4 million mark, almost a league average contract, that he should be outperforming his cap hit and should be, a very valuable asset to build around. But he hasn't put up a ton of points, and he's been pretty inconsistent in Carolina. I think the Grizzlies' patience is wearing a bit thin, but to be honest, Dean, I think that was connected to Dominic Kubalik. I think when Kubalik's name came out, I think it was a Kubalik Teravainen trade talks were heating up. I think that was potentially the deal in the works, was Kubalik for Teravainen plus something else. So obviously that something else couldn't be agreed on as of now, but I think that could they could revisit that between now and April 12th as far as Kubalik for Teravainen plus something. But Teravainen's going to be generating a lot of interest now that the Grizzlies have come out as well and said, hey, he's available. Let's see some offers. I think a lot of the teams that are maybe rebuilding would take interest in Teravainen because he has a quality contract. And it's just a matter of what they can offer the Grizzlies. That's a more productive player in the present, a more consistent player, because again, the Grizzlies are in the top 10 and they'd like to finish as high as possible as the reigning defending regular season champion from 2020. So the Grizzlies are in that 7, 8, 9 range. They'd like to be closer into the top 5 and potentially take a run at defending their crown. So in order to do that, they're going to need to upgrade on a guy like Teuvo Teravainen, who's been his production's been frustrating and kind of hit and miss this season.
I was a little bit surprised to see that David Krejci is out there from the Brutes. I know he's missed some time this year, but certainly putting up some points now.
Yeah, it's funny how when these trades happen or these trade bait board posts happen, it's almost like the real world player responds, right? We've talked at length about Evgeny Malkin, and he's continued to be on a heater ever since Red Army traded him away. Brutes came out and said, David Krejci's available, and he doesn't want to trade him to a standings rival necessarily, but if one of the higher end top 10 franchises wanted to take a chance on David Krejci, again, a pretty big contract, but he'd be interested in maybe a younger player of similar caliber plus some futures, right? Maybe a guy like a Dominic Kubalik or something. But I think with David Krejci, the message was heard loud and clear when the Brutes put him on the trade bait board, because his next game he had 3 assists and I think led the Brutes in fantasy points for the night on Thursday. And he recently scored his first goal of the season as well. So David Krejci, a guy who tends to get better as the season goes. So I think he could just be heating up as well. And he might want to remain a Brute, or he might be trying to drive up his trade value to get some interest and make sure he gets another franchise that is more welcoming or more appreciative to have him. But I think the Brutes took notice for sure that he had a 3-point night, and that raises the asking price of a trade, probably a recency bias, and potentially makes the Brutes think twice about trading David Krejci.
All right, before we get to insider advice, quickly run through what's happening with Jamie Benn and a couple of Knicks.
Yeah, Jamie Benn's name's out there again. Previously acquired actually from the Elite Assassins, now owned by Kamikaze. And I think Donnie Tolk was sort of upgrading his roster, improving his roster for the present, but probably realizes Kamikaze's not going to make a playoff push. And, Jamie Benn's had some fairly hard miles over his career. He plays a real physical style, but he's still a beast in this scoring system. He still puts up a lot of points over a lot of different categories. So I think, again, a bit of a big cap hit, but I think Kamikaze wants to see what's out there for Jamie Benn, see what kind of interest there could be. If anybody has the cap space that's closer to the playoff picture, maybe somebody would look for Benn as an upgrade as a ringer, especially with Tyler Seguin coming back. We know Benn and Seguin have such good chemistry. So getting that boost, there could be some interest in Jamie Benn, but I'm sure that's because of his contract. It's not a hot topic, one of the players that's of the most interest currently on the trade board, but he is out there. And then the Knicks, right? The Knicks are still available. Nick Foligno and Nick Leddy. So the Elite Assassins who made that blockbuster trade, they're not looking for cash for Nick Foligno or not as a main return, but certainly if they're rebuilding, Nick Foligno's on the older end now. They'd like some futures for Nick Foligno, some picks and prospects. And then Nick Leddy as well with the Tornadoes, who's a bottom 5 franchise. The Tornadoes would like a first round pick and some futures prospects as well to let go of Nick Leddy. And I think Nick Leddy's a guy who's going to get more interest as the trade deadline gets closer, but as his contract, his cap hit goes down a little bit too. But I think with Nick Leddy, the big thing is he's been hot lately. I think he had 3 assists again the other night. So he's getting noticed and his name's out there. And I think Nick Leddy, Nick Foligno are 2 of those names that we could see move sooner than later, whereas Jamie Benn, I think, might be an off-season trade. It's going to be hard for somebody to fit Jamie Benn under the cap as far as the contenders go.
All right, let's get to now your insider advice and a couple of things to run through. And the first one is a bit of a scouting I don't know, unrest you might call it, and they have kind of formed their own scouting chat with, filled with scouts, a couple of owners, no admins or anything like that. They want to work through their issues. What's your advice for this?
Yeah, I think the main advice for the scouts is be patient. I'm trying to preach patience because We haven't even seen an entry auction play out where scout-owned prospects were available. 2021's the first draft where the franchises will officially be bidding on and purchasing prospects from the scouts. So we haven't even seen the system play out yet. So I think be patient on that front and be patient with the ecosystem, right? What UFF Sports is building here. It's not going to be just the UFHL, which is the NHL league. We already have the UFAHL. That gameplay is going to start up, hopefully next season or in the coming seasons. And we're going to grow this once we have that gameplay engine ready to go. We're going to move on to all the other major professional leagues, the KHL, the SHL, the Liga in Finland, the NL in Switzerland, the DEL in Germany. We're going to make sure that as many players that are owned on the platform, or as many as possible, will be playing in their equivalent real-world league within the UFF Sports ecosystem. So as that growth happens, and it's not going to happen overnight, it might take 2, 3, 5 years to get to the point where we have 12 or 13 hockey leagues, but that's the vision. And once we get there, the scouts that own these players that aren't in the UFHL, and these prospects, they're going to be earning constant revenue through the leasing system for whichever franchises in all these other leagues draft these players and prospects. So they're going to earn revenue every step of the way through the development. And that's the big picture for the scouts, is to be patient, let the ecosystem evolve and develop. And what I've been saying too is, we're complaining about, kids that are 15, 16, 17 years old, 18-year-old draft kids not bringing an immediate return on investment. Well, that kid's not retiring next year. He's going to be playing somewhere in the world 5 years from now, likely 10 years from now, maybe even 15 years from now. 10 years, they're only in their mid to late 20s. So if the platform grows the way we envision and we get to that, 12, 13 hockey leagues within 5 years, that player, and with the way NFTs are going, the longer you hold that player, the more valuable he's actually going to get. And plus, you have all the scout-to-scout transaction potential with trades and sales within the scouting community. So I don't think they're sitting on negative value assets. I don't think they're stuck with these prospects. I think their value is only going to go up. So I don't see the real issue, other than potential issue that they see is that franchises can stockpile picks and get a player for the minimum bid, right? But even that, the minimum bid through this algorithm was made to guarantee scouts on average a 25% minimum profit from the entry auction. So I don't really see the issue there. If there was no algorithm and a player you spent $500 on was going to sell for $25, yeah, I could see the issue there. And so the algorithm was put in place to protect scouts' interests and ensure that they are profitable. And like I said, I think big picture, as more leagues come, more revenue comes, and the scouts will be a lot happier. But in the present, they see only 64 prospects are going to get picked or purchased through the entry auction. And what about the other 2,000 prospects we own? And, how are we going to get our money worth if our top prospects aren't selling for big money to offset what we spent on all our prospects that aren't selling in the immediate future? But those prospects are going to bring you revenue down the road. So again, preaching patience for the scouts.
Yeah, and Trish is the owner, my wife, of High Level Scouting, and we had the discussion, she's not on Telegram as much, but I try to keep her informed, and she made her just saying, if there's going to be some kind of voting, please let me know. But we had the discussion, and it was we kind of said, like, I would like to let the algorithm go and see what it's like before we actually scrap it. It's, I kind of see it as complaining about a tripping penalty before the game has started, or worrying, maybe complaining isn't the right word, but worrying about a tripping penalty. Listen, scouts are an important part of this ecosystem, and a massive part, and there has to be a good relationship, some give and take. But I think we do need to wait and see what happens with the algorithm, and then revisit it every year. Just like owners' meetings, we revisit and tweak things, just like the NHL does. This system is going to constantly be evolving. It's very, very new, and I think we all have to be, that not just scouts too. There's a lot of, not a lot, but there's a number of owners in the past that, have been a little bit impatient. We have to let this thing evolve a little bit before we make massive changes, especially with this algorithm. So I hope there is patience, but I do think it's good that they're getting their ducks in a row, and they should have, some sort of say in how things are run in this whole plan, because they are an important part. So hopefully they get that together and we can all work as partners in this one. You also have some more advice on LTIR risks, which we talked about last week.
Yeah, what are the chances that we made it a talking point last week, and this week it's becoming big news because the Yetis, who were in that race for first in the top four and kind of settled into fourth place, got tripped up by LTIR, and they placed Jace Harlick, who was out at the start of the season, former Brandon Wheat King, out at the start of the season after signing with Vancouver. He came back on February 13th. Vancouver activated him. Colin, the GM of the Yetis, either didn't notice he was activated at that time or didn't notify the league, the UFHL, that, hey, are my players coming off LTIR? You need to remove the cap relief that I'm getting from this player. He's back in the lineup. And Colin didn't communicate that to the league. And then one of his rivals, another franchise, noticed, hey, why does Yeti still have, $800,000 cap relief from Jace Harlick a month later on March 15th? And it was brought to the brass's attention and the competition committee's attention. And basically, once we delved into it more and looked into it, we saw that not only was he no longer on LTIR in the NHL, but Yetis had been using him in the UFHL at least a handful of times, taking him on and off the IR, and knowing that he was back in the NHL and dressing him without notifying the league of the LTIR. And again, so at some point when the LTIR penalty was removed and he was in the lineup, that roster is now illegal because of salary cap violation. That $800,000 that was added back to the Yetis from the cap relief that was no longer applicable from February 13th put the Yetis over the salary cap because they're one of the franchises that was close to the cap, as well as a legal roster because you're playing a player that you're technically considered LTIR. So the penalties could have been harsher for the Yetis. They could have lost all their fantasy points going back to February 13th and just said, you didn't follow the rules. You lose an entire month's worth of points, which would have knocked them completely perhaps out of the playoff picture, but certainly out of the top 10. But I think a compromise has been made there where the league's willing to, the nights that they dressed Jace Harlick and willingly played him knowing he was on LTIR or forgetting that he was on LTIR, the nights that they dressed Jace Harlick and the nights that they were over the salary cap in violation of the salary cap, I think it amounts to 7 or somewhere around 7 nights. I believe the Yetis will be forfeiting those fantasy points as well as being fined. But again, if you're using LTIR, and the league was very out front with this from when we adopted LTIR for this season, if you're putting a player on LTIR, it's your responsibility. The onus is on the franchise to notify the league when that player comes off the LTIR or off the COVID list if you're using the COVID list. So, Yeti sort of said, well, it's a glitch. He was sort of on IR and how can we be blamed for this? But you're responsible for your player, and you need to, if Jace Harlick's on LTIR in the NHL, you need to be checking Cap Friendly or NHL or Vancouver Canucks website, daily, weekly, whatever. You need to catch that as soon as possible and notify the league that, hey, my player is back. And we saw it today. Wayne Simmons is back for Toronto, and Alex LeBlanc, the general manager of the Battlehawks, immediately went on the LTIR message board or group on Telegram and said, hey, we need to remove the cap relief I was getting from Wayne Simmons, and he's back in my lineup tonight. He's no longer on LTIR. That's the communication level franchises need to have, and that's how closely you got to be watching your players, because an oversight on Colin's part, I know he's kind of putting it back on the league and some glitches within the league or within the infrastructure, but ultimately, franchise's responsibility, the onus is on the franchise to know when your player's back from LTIR and notify the league immediately. So unfortunately, it's going to cost the Yetis a significant amount of fantasy points, and they're probably going to drop closer to 10th than first in the standings.
Yeah, well, we have the top 10 coming up a little bit later, and there's definitely a drop, and there's, 100% this is on the franchises. I mean, the franchises wanted to be able to have be able to make moves and not have to tell the commissioner every time there's a move. Well, that's a double-edged sword. You've got to be on the ball. This is not your regular weekly lock-it-in fantasy league. This is even goes further than just daily changes, as you were just alluding to. This is 100% on the franchises, and if I get burned by it, I have nobody to blame but myself. So it's why you have to be really on top of things. And the penalty and the fine, in my opinion, could have been a lot worse than just the nights that Jace Horlak was in the lineup. So I think the Yetis actually should consider themselves a little bit lucky that the penalties weren't a lot worse than that. All right, let's chat a little bit about expansion draft minimums, because this is also going to be a really, really important topic in the next, however many months we are until the expansion draft.
Yeah, so the expansion draft deadline for protected lists is July 17th, both in the NHL and the UFHL. And again, the April 12th trade deadline's coming up, though there will be a trade window following the playoffs prior to that deadline for expansion draft protected lists to be submitted. But the main thing you got to, and again, Cap Friendly has an FAQ for all things expansion draft. Anybody who's a franchise owner, a general manager in the UFHL should have that memorized, all those rules, because we are mirroring the NHL for those expansion draft rules. But the one that jumps out is the minimum requirement. And a lot of people have been asking about that. You need a minimum of 2 forwards, 1 defenseman, and 1 goaltender exposed. That sounds like, that's easy. That's, 2 forwards, 1 D, and 1 goaltender. That's nothing. But when you look at the rules, the fine print, the skaters need to be under contract for next season, 21-22, and played in 40-plus games this season, the current season, or 70-plus games over the last 2 seasons combined. And the goaltender needs to be under contract for next season, 21-22, or needs to be an RFA, not a UFA, following this season. So those are the fine print there is what you really need to factor in when you're looking at your exposed list. And the vast majority of franchises, this won't be an issue. But I think goaltenders is one that people really need to pay attention to. And I look at the Red Army because they acquired Brian Elliott for the purpose of the expansion draft. But you take a closer look, Brian Elliott is actually a UFA after this season. So unless Philadelphia extends Brian Elliott between now and July 17th, and he's under contract for next season, then he wouldn't be eligible to be exposed. It would have to be Carter Hart that would be exposed by the Red Army. So that would be a big blow to Luke Grenier. But I do think there's enough goal. Don't panic if Luke hears that. Don't panic, and everybody else, because there's enough goaltenders out there that are under contract already for next season that are available through scouts, through the open market even. And certainly you look at the UFAHL rosters, almost every one of them has a goaltender that's eligible to be exposed in the expansion draft. But the one that was just available via auction and didn't get any bids was Keith Kincaid, sort of the third stringer for the Rangers. He's been called up lately because Igor Shesterkin's been injured, and Alexander Georgiev's sort of been starting, and Keith Kincaid's been up with the Rangers. But he is a goaltender who's signed for the next 2 seasons, and nobody took a chance on him in that $50 auction, which will be now the minimum sale price for Keith Kincaid. But it's as easy as that for Red Army, whether it's Keith Kincaid or a number of other guys. But you got to make sure between now and July 17th that those minimum requirements are met for your exposed list, because if they're not, you're going to end up having to expose somebody from your protected list that could be a very valuable piece for the expansion franchise. And I don't think the expansion franchise would let Red Army off the hook if Carter Hart was sitting there. So I think that's just one example. Every franchise needs to take a close look. And I'm sure if I went through all the franchises based on minimum requirements, we could find some other examples of places where franchises could be in trouble if they don't add a skater here or there or a position here or there to make sure they meet those minimum requirements. So review the cap-friendly FAQ on the expansion draft and make sure your roster and your protected list will be compliant come July 17th.
All right, let's quickly wrap up with the discussion that is going to be taking place in the next little while between owners about the entry fee next year.
Yeah, so April 12th is when the prize pool caps for 2021. And so right now, this past week, thanks to that Elite Assassins Generals blockbuster trade, it did officially surpass 50,000 USD. It potentially will get up to that 51, or well, it's already over 51,000. Could get close to that 52, 53,000 USD prize pool. And the franchises did vote prior to this season to defer $10,000 to 2022 and 2023 each. So the actual prize pool for 2021 will be between $30,000 and $35,000. So what we've said with the entry fees going forward is that the franchises would be voting on a percentage of that season's prize pool. So on April 12th, that prize pool caps, whatever it is, 30,000, 35,000, somewhere in that range, it'll be capped. And then the franchises will be presented voting options. And, if you do the math, 1% of the prize pool would be $300 entry fee for next season, which would be up $100 increase from what the entry fee was for the 2021 season. And then if you go to 2%, that's $600. If you go to 5%, that's $1,500. If you go all the way up to 10% of the prize pool, that could be, $3,000 plus dollars. And I know there's an appetite from some franchises to, jump that prize pool really high right away. And some or the entry fee rather, and some would like a steady, more of a, option 1 or option 2 at the $300 or $600 range. But certainly now you can kind of get an idea. Franchises can start preparing for what the options might be for the annual entry fee, which would be due 48 hours after the Stanley Cup final, Klein Cup final concludes, which will be the last possible day of the playoffs in the NHL, barring COVID, would be July 9th. That would be Game 7 in the NHL. So somewhere in early July, the entry fees are going to be due for 2022. And so you can start budgeting, start preparing, start saving, knowing that it's going to be somewhere in that range. And certainly the franchise owners will have a vote and will have a say at their mid-season meetings next month following the April 12th trade deadline. But just to be aware that, these are the rough estimates of what the potential voting options may be.
Interesting stuff always around the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League and UFF Sports, and big things are coming for sure, Larry. As always, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll be talking to you very shortly this weekend for another UFFS podcast.
Thanks, Dean. Looking forward to it.
This is UFHL Now with Dean Millard. Get in the game, where you own the game.
All right, that is going to wrap up a very busy and jam-packed edition of UFHL Now here on the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network. Here's the schedule. We've got a UFFS podcast coming this Sunday. They come your way every second Sunday, so look for that one coming out with Darren Bates and Larry Fisher on Sunday. Fantasy Hockey Time comes your way Monday morning, 2 Minute Tuesday, the next day in the afternoon on Tuesday with Darren Bates. Tracking the Draft with Craig Button and myself comes at you Wednesday afternoon, and then we're right back on Friday with UFHL Now. As mentioned, another edition of UFFS, a podcast with Darren Bates and Larry Fisher, will be featuring an owner in the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League this weekend. Okay, that's the cue for me to wrap things up here on the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League Now, keeping you up to date on the biggest, best, and most exciting fantasy sports platform that is combining fantasy gameplay with the blockchain. We are on the Zilliqa blockchain, and these are not just players, they are NFTs that can be bought, sold, traded, etc. Keep it locked on UFSN for more news about the Score token launch that UFF Sports has going on. There is so much going on behind the scenes. It is so exciting. More news about the UFGA also coming forward soon. Reach out to UFSN if you are a sports fantasy podcast that needs a home. Have yourself a great week, everybody. We will talk to you soon.
UFHL Now is produced by DM Productions. To get in touch, head to www.podcastalley.ca.